The following interview was conducted with Mary Kingsley on behalf of the Augsburg College Archives for the Augsburg College Oral History Project. It took place on March 18th, 2015 at Mary Kingsley's home. The interviewer is Anny Finch. Mary Kingsley is a former associate professor of modern languages, taught Spanish for 42 years at Augsburg College. During her time at Augsburg, she was a key member in faculty governance and encouraged and engaged students about how one should be in the world. She also has a passion for justice. Thank you again for your time. My first question is just to tell me about your background in education, kind of a backstory.
Well, I grew up in Crosby, Ironton, Minnesota, a mining town, and my father was a mining engineer. And I went to high school at Crosby Ironton High School. And then I followed in the tradition of our family and went to St. Olaf, where my grandmother had been widowed at a young age, and she went to Northfield, bought a house and made a living there so she could educate her children and have them go to St. Olaf, which they did. So we came into that tradition. So I got my BA from St. Olaf in 1962, and I was a member of the SPAN program that went to Spain in the summer of 1961 before I graduated. And because of that, I switched from my major in college, which was French, to Spanish, which was my minor, and went back to Spain on my own and went for a year to the University of Madrid and got a Título de Estudios Hispánicos from the University of Madrid. And then, because I wasn't planning on getting any degree, I just was doing it for myself, I decided I better stay and get a master's degree. So Middlebury had its own program by that second year, and then I finished that in 1964. And I applied for a job by mail. And I applied to 4 colleges or universities, and I got a job at the University of South Dakota in Vermillion, South Dakota. And everybody there would ask each other, how did you end up here? And I was only 24 years old, and I'd already ended up somewhere. But I did enjoy that year. But when I was there, I called Mimi Kingsley, who taught Spanish at Augsburg, and Mimi Kingsley and Jim Kingsley were my SPAN advisors. And she said that they were going to go to Chile to work for the Ford Foundation on a library in Chile, and why didn't I come to Augsburg to teach? So anyway, she recommended me to be hired at Augsburg, and in March, I think, they called me, and I thought I was supposed to stay 2 years at least at some place. Well, anyway, I thought, well, if I get offered the job, I'll take it. So I left and went to Augsburg after 1 year at the University of South Dakota. And I had never been to Augsburg, so I'd never seen Augsburg. So when I told the dean, Martin Quanbeck, that I'd never seen Augsburg, when he offered me the job and I accepted, he was kind of shocked. So then I decided I better go take a look at Augsburg, and I gave them a look at me. So I went to Augsburg, and Mimi Kingsley introduced me to the dean, and we talked for an hour, and we talked only about religion for the whole hour. And I was never introduced to the chair of the Department of Modern Languages. But so the reason we talked about religion was that in those days it was legal to ask the question. And I had been in Spain, and I had had a lot of questions about my beliefs. So I had been raised a Lutheran, and then I spent 2 years in a residence run by a Catholic order. So I was very introduced to Catholicism as well, but I was really kind of slipping out of Christianity at that. So I wrote in my Augsburg application that I was half Catholic and half other. So he wanted to know what I meant by that. So that's what we discussed for an hour. And we had an interesting conversation, and he didn't take back his offer of the job. So that was my introduction.
Tell me about when you first started at Augsburg, how the feeling was, how the people were.
Well, we had faculty workshops in those days, and there was a new dean, Dean Ken Bailey, and I was new, and the president, Oscar Anderson, I'm not sure, I don't think he was new that year, but he was quite new. And he had hired Ken Bailey from Moorhead, from which he had come originally to. He was a pastor before at a well-known church in Concordia, Oscar Anderson was. So anyway, we had this workshop. So I knew I was coming into this with relatively new people in the administration. And so I first went to a language department meeting before the faculty meeting. So I heard all the conversation about something that they were talking about, and I heard what they were going to present to the faculty. And when we got to the faculty meeting, the chair got up and presented something entirely different from what the department had decided. So I started wondering, oh, what is this? What's going on here? That here they decide something and he goes and presents something else. Well, so that was my introduction to the department and to faculty meetings. And so I was more or less just an interested, ignorant bystander to those first meetings. But when I first started, I think we had 8 courses then at that time, if I remember correctly, 8 courses a semester, or a year rather, for a semester. And I think I had 2 beginning classes and 2 intermediate classes. And one thing that stands out in my mind is that I went and told that intermediate class that the grade they got would be exactly what they deserved. And there was a visible gasp in get what they deserved. So the whole group came up afterwards and said, oh, well, we had this terrible class last year and we all signed up for the same one so that there wouldn't be, they wouldn't believe how little we knew and everything. So they were all worried about what would happen. And I think that it turned out all right, that somehow we made it through that second year, but they were. And I think someone had been fired in order to hire me. They'd been planning to do it, but they waited till about the last possible minute. That's why I got the offer in March to come in. And so this person had not been too successful with the students. So they were worried, but everything worked out all right, I think. So I think we had a good year.
Talking about you becoming a department chair, can you describe the role of what a department chair does, why you took it on?
Well, that was sort of an interesting thing. It was pretty well known that I didn't enjoy department meetings. And here I was first asked to be the interim chair because Mimi Johnson, who was the chair and taught French, was asked to take on some other work. So the dean asked me if I would be acting chair. And I think everybody was surprised when I said yes, that I would do it. Because I think, as I said, it was pretty well known that I didn't enjoy department meetings. For one thing, as I recall, there wasn't we didn't really have an agenda that we would stick to. So when I went to be acting chair, I told them that I figured that they probably knew that they were probably surprised that I accepted this job. And I said that we were going to have an agenda, and we were going to start our meetings at 3:45, and we were going to finish at 5. Our meetings just went on as long as the last person was talking and anybody was still left to talk to. So I was trying to bring order. Well, then I discovered that I enjoyed bringing order to chaos, which I saw happening. And I think that the department enjoyed that too because we got out. So the next year I was elected chair unanimously. I think I had a lot of support. By the second election of a 3-year term, I had made some decisions that caused, so I didn't enjoy such a support by the second election, and by the third one, I think I had to vote for myself to make sure I would get elected. So I was chair for 3 terms, and then Frankie took over for 6 years, and then after 6 years, she didn't want to do it anymore, and I came back in for another 9 years. 3 terms. So, but the work of the chair involves a lot of things, and there were, personnel difficulties and questions from students, but mainly getting the courses, deciding on the curriculum and getting the courses set up and assigning everybody, including all the adjuncts, to courses year by year and keeping that going in an orderly fashion. And I think deans have told me that almost everybody handed in programs for the following year with mistakes, and I had several things. I said, oh, well, no, I didn't think I'd made any mistakes, and I said, oh, well, maybe not. But then I did make one, and it was a Lulu. That was that I assigned Don Steinmetz to 2 classes at the same time. And we found out about 2 hours. He came in, oh no, there's a terrible mistake. And he hadn't noticed it either. Something had shifted. We'd changed something in the summer. It was different from what I had in the fall when I handed it in. And I put him into an open spot, and we had filled it with we'd moved his other class, and neither one of us noticed that. So another Spanish teacher switched with him, and before the classes met, we had it sorted out again, but it was a little tricky. But so that was a Lulu to have somebody assigned for 2 classes at the same time for someone who was bragging about not making mistakes. And so I don't just make little ones, I made a big one. So that for me was, and keeping everything, solving questions. Somebody, for example, had a question of a student cheating in a class. Well, then it ended up in my lap with that, and I dealt with that and different, all sorts of things. But mostly people took care of their own issues with students and things. But once in a while, you deal with something like that.
Did the experiences or responsibilities, did they ever change over time since when you first started as a department chair to later coming in, or has it always been kind of a consistent?
By the time I was elected chair, the chairs were elected by the department, but when I first went to Augsburg, they were named by the administration. And I was telling Phil Adamo yesterday about that shift where I can remember going into Dean Bailey, and I said, we need to have a process at Augsburg for getting rid of department chairs. And he looked at me and he said, I don't like your language. And then I realized getting rid of sounded a little bit fierce. But anyway, if you look in the faculty handbook, there is a process now for the removal of department chairs. And then it went into voting. I don't remember exactly how that came, of the department votes. That came later after that. But so that would be another process that came before I was chair, where the departments elected chairs. And we had the 3-year terms and have another election and so on. So that process changed in that way. There was a process for departments. And I think that it might have been used once only. But just having a process helped, so that people, and having people elected too, so they would try not to do things that would be too disruptive. One of my colleagues said to me one time, everybody, meaning all departments, look out for their own piece of the pie. I was famous for always thinking of the college first, much to the consternation of the department sometimes, because it meant doing what I thought every department should do, which was to cut classes if we didn't have large enrollments, and to try to be responsible in managing the money that we had and the resources that we had, keeping the overall college in mind as well, and not holding on to everything we could. So I said to the person who said everyone looks out for their own piece of pie, my answer always was, there's no piece without a pie. So we have to look out for the pie. And so in that sense, I was also looking out for our piece. But the college, so I always did try to look out for the college as a whole. On the other hand, I think when Frankie came in, Frankie was really good at thinking about how the department should maybe change over the years. And so it's good to have different people, if you can, have different people with different visions. So I was trying to keep things together and keep it going with the needs of the college, and looking out for the department too in my way. And Frankie, I think, was better looking out for some of the shifting trends, and the department did change after I left, and they were working on that my last year. I had Frankie on a committee working with people to change, and the name of the department has changed even to cultural studies or something. I can't even remember exactly what it became. I'm confident that the department is taking care of all of that after I've gone. They're going off in a new direction, and that's a good thing.
I'll shift a little bit to your involvement in the faculty governance, because you kind of touched on it. Can you kind of discuss your role with the faculty beyond just being a department chair, and kind of how many deans or presidents you've served under while you were at Augsburg?
Well, first I served under, as I said, Oscar Anderson and Ken Bailey, and then Ken Bailey left the deanship, and he went into the faculty, which was a difficult thing to do, and I always admired him greatly for being able to make that switch. It would not be easy to be removed as dean and then go into the faculty. And he did that, and he did it well. And he was elected to faculty senate and played a major role as a faculty member. So I served with him as dean first and then as a colleague. And I always had a high regard for him and considered him a friend. And that's when Chuck Anderson came in as dean. And when he first came in as dean, I had just written a little play that was criticizing the administration. And it was criticizing the Oscar Anderson administration because the faculty at that time had a personnel committee that decided promotions, and they had gone through the whole process of making recommendations, but they hadn't announced them yet. And Oscar Anderson announced that we had too many people in the upper ranks, and he was suspending promotions for the year. So I wrote a little play criticizing that action. I was sick at home with the flu, and I sat down and wrote this play. It was called The Little Engine, a morality play, and it was about how this poor engine was trying to get over to pastus professorum fulorum. I made up Latin sounding like things, and I had a good time with it. But everybody trying to get through, and then things changed and shifted, and it was quite critical. Well, I showed it to Chuck Anderson. He was riding through the hall past my office often, and he stopped in, and he was the new dean, and I gave him a copy of this play. And then he said, "I can't wait till you start writing things for me." Well, he probably would have shifted on that, waiting for me to write things for him. We had a complicated relationship, and I did have quite a few complaints about things, and did write things and talk with him later. So he was the dean under Oscar, and then he was chosen dean, or chosen president. In fact, I think Oscar retired a year early, maybe, because St. Olaf was looking for a president, and I think he was concerned that Chuck might go to St. Olaf instead of staying at Augsburg. So then, by that time, I was on faculty senate, and I could back up and tell a little bit more about that. But I was on faculty senate, and I was the committee to choose the new president could include one male faculty member and a female faculty member, and the faculty senate was going to choose these people. And the faculty senate chose me and John Holm in chemistry. And I had mixed feelings because, as usual, I had just been through some big confrontation with Chuck Anderson. And so I went and talked to him, and I was trying to figure out whether I could be completely unbiased in that role. And then I decided, I thought I could be, but I thought I shouldn't stay in that role, knowing that we had these differences of opinion. And I thought it would be better if somebody else would do it, just in case anybody would think that I would be biased or whatever. I thought I could be unbiased, but I removed myself from that. And then I think Marie McNeff served in that role. So there was good faculty administrative, I think, good faculty governance procedures going on. And as I recall, I think this is accurate, the committee to choose the new president decided that it was clear who should be the new president early on, and they suspended the search and just chose Chuck Anderson. And I remember that I saw him out in the parking lot, and I think I was one of the first people to congratulate him on his win in the search, and so that he was president for many years. So then after Charles Anderson, then I served under Frame till he left, and then that was with his dean, who was then Chris Kimball, who was a colleague of mine, who went from being associate professor to being the academic dean, which isn't an easy thing to do. And then 1 year under Pribenow before I retired, and that was with then Barbara Anderson, he didn't call her an interim dean, but she was sort of placed in there for a temporary time and then became the official dean at the request of Pribenow, who named her his only choice. So she was a friend of mine, and I wanted her to be the dean, but I thought there should be a search. So I was the only friend of Barbara Farley who wrote a letter and said, Barbara Farley is a friend of mine. I want her to be dean. We should follow the official process and have a search, an open search, because this method is not good for Barbara Farley, it's not good for the president, and it's not good for the college. So that was ignored, which is okay with me because I did what I thought I should do, and I thought I was being a good friend to Barbara Farley by pointing that out. So that's sort of the history of the presidents and the deans. But when I first got to Augsburg, one of the first committees I was on was the social committee. The social committee was made up of all women, and guess what their job was? To decide what should be served at the faculty meeting. And one of the 5 women on the committee would pour the coffee. And a good time was had by all, of course. So I sat down and I wrote a letter to Oscar Anderson. It was one of my first letters to a president. And I said that I thought the social committee should be abolished because we as faculty had much more important things to do, such as to plan a faculty love-in, a faculty pot party. And I had about 5 things that were equally serious, in response, I got a very formal letter from Oscar Anderson saying that the social committee was a very important committee and would have to continue and needed to continue and so on, something on that order. So we named all men to it, and it was abolished immediately after that. So in those early years, things were quite different from what they became. And I went to Augsburg in 1965, and in the early 70s, about 10 people were fired, and most of them were women. And some women anonymously, who were not fired, I think, or weren't affected by the cut, filed a lawsuit charging sexism. And it became big news in the paper, and the president was going to name a committee to study this, whether or not there were bias against women at Augsburg. So he named Marjorie Sibley to be the chairperson of that committee, and the faculty senate named the 4 other members. And the 4 other members were Miles Stenchel, Jean Skibby, Norma Noonan, and I was the 4th one, so the 5th one. So we went to a meeting with Oscar Anderson and other administrators. And in that meeting, President Anderson said that we could only study the documents of Augsburg to see if they were sexist, but we couldn't study any cases. So I looked at him and I said, do you mean to say that if Augsburg was unfair to a faculty member or faculty members at Augsburg, you don't want to know it? And I get emotional easily, so I assume that it's true. I had tears in my eyes probably, and another administrator said, well, you people are really uptight. Mary's got tears in her eyes. And another member of the committee said, no, we're not uptight. But if we can't look into the cases, I'm resigning from this committee. Me too, me too, me too, me too, me too. So immediately he shifted and said we could look into the cases, which we did for 2 years. And then we made recommendations, and to the credit of Oscar Anderson and his administration, they followed our recommendations. We had started with a new salary scale that was pretty objective. It didn't take into account subjective criteria. And Miles Stenchel and I spent one whole Easter vacation sitting in here studying all the documentation about every person. And we found that in almost every case, men were favored over women in the salary. And even disciplines that were considered more feminine were discriminated against in salary. So something like English versus chemistry, English would have a lower salary. So that was an important committee, and it made a big difference. And I think it gave that Augsburg was ahead of a lot of other private colleges in trying to hire women, promote women. And there weren't any women on faculty senate at the beginning either. And I don't remember how they were named or if they were elected. But Miles Stenchel instituted the hair system where you could wait. You could name, if any group of people named, I think you needed about 10 or 12 votes. If you had number one, were rated number one by 10 or 12 people, you could get elected. So it weighted the vote, sort of like that last election on the mayor in Minneapolis. So that helped women to get on Senate. And at 1 year after that, I remember 1 year there was only one man on Senate. That was very unusual. but so Senate became more representative of the desires of various groups on the faculty. So Senate was an important part. And I was on faculty Senate for at least 25 years straight. So I was on that a lot. But one person speaking out could have a big effect also. And I did things, like my play that I put out all over. Another time, Charles Anderson announced that he was going to, he didn't announce, no, he sent letters to 5 people and told them that they weren't guaranteed a contract for the next year. And the reason was he had to make some cuts in order to have raises for the rest of the faculty. So somebody who worked under me, Joel Muggy, worked under me as I was director of international programs, so that was another role that I played. And he worked under me, and he came and told me that he'd gotten one of these letters. So then I suspected that somebody else, who was a friend of mine in the English department, I didn't know who all had gotten them, but she had gone home. So I went and asked Chuck if she was getting one, and he said yes. And I said, you should call her so that she will know that she's getting one of these letters. Otherwise, she's going to come tomorrow morning and find it under her door. And that would not be good. Yeah. He said, you got yourself into this mess, you get yourself out. Because I think I had mentioned to her that some of these letters had gotten out, but we didn't know whether she was getting one. Well, he wouldn't call her. So I ended up writing a letter to the whole faculty, and I asked them to vote to give up their raises for a year to save those 5 people. And some colleagues whom I respected didn't think we should make that vote, and they got up and left when the vote happened, because they didn't want to vote no, but they didn't want to be voting yes either. And I respect that. And they left, but the faculty voted to give up their raise to save those 5 people. And those 5 positions were safe in those departments for many years to cut. I think they're still there. They didn't have to be cut. That's the only thing I ever fought for that I think now was a mistake, that we shouldn't have given up our raises because it put us even farther behind, that we should have argued for something else. But it did save those 5 people, and the faculty in general was willing to do that. And in our department sometimes too, we had offered to cut back in our department to save somebody in our department, but the administration wouldn't let us do that. And that probably was right, because you have to keep thinking of what's going to go on and what you can reasonably sustain. And so people sometimes making some of these generous sacrifices, maybe it's not the best thing. Maybe that wasn't the best thing for our overall salaries, for example. So I have wondered about that. But at the time, I was convinced that was the right thing to do. So that'd be one thing I'd look back and wonder, was that, maybe that was a mistake.
You were talking about being on the faculty senate. During your time that you were on it, can you discuss kind of the priorities of the faculty senate and how they were determined?
Well, I think that they probably were determined by issues that were brought to us by other faculty members or the administration or the board. And one year that was really important, I don't remember what year it was, but one year, Charles Anderson announced in the fall that he was going to declare financial exigency, which is a really big step, but it allows you to fire tenured people. But it means you're in serious financial trouble. Well, the faculty senate that year, because somebody on the board had requested it, was studying the committee structure. So that's what we were working on. And a friend of mine kept saying to me, I don't think we really have to declare financial exigency. I don't think that that's what we should really be doing, in one ear and out the other. Finally, there was something in between one ear and the other that stopped that message and started listening and thinking, well, she's right. We really shouldn't do that. So I went to Senate and I said, what are we doing talking about committee structure when the president's talking about declaring financial exigency? Why are we talking about committee structure? We should be talking about this. So we started building up, and we had other people on the faculty interested in one thing and another. We finally convinced the president that was the wrong thing to do and gave reasons, and he listened. And we stopped it. And the dean was saying, well, we're going to be better than ever. Well, without any plan. Well, how are we going to be better than ever? We cut how many tenured people would we cut? And how would we then, how is this going to get out and so on? So anyway, we convinced the president, and he convinced the board, and we had a big committee on where we could cut elsewhere. And a lot of the things that we said we would cut, the committee decided to cut football. You can see how that went over. We also decided to cut Norwegian. But of course, that didn't save a lot of money. It's always hard to cut. That's one of our weaknesses at Augsburg, is knowing where to cut and really evaluating how are things going. Where could we save? What do we really need? And now in languages would be an example of, with French and German have lower enrollments a lot of places, and we don't have a whole lot of French students or a whole lot of German students. So or with Frankie Shackelford leaving Norwegian, do we really need to have, Norwegian was saved. And it was saved by Ed Sabella of the business department, who got up and spoke against it and said we should not be cutting Norwegian. We're a Norwegian school, and that came back in. I don't know how football was saved, but I'm sure the president had a role in that. And it probably was not a good idea. That's right. That probably wasn't a good idea. But the faculty and the administration working together, we all ended up being together. And so in a lot of these things where I had differences of opinion with Charles Anderson, and I was a faculty leader who spoke out often in opposition, he wrote me a letter one time and said, I've tried to think about why you and I are so often on opposite sides. And he was trying to understand, which is something that I look back on and I respect and admire and know was an important characteristic. And he said, I think it's because I try to get as much for the college as I can, and you try to get as much for the individual as you can. Because I defended individuals who were in trouble with the college, who were fired or removed as chair or something like that. And I tried to help them through the grievance procedure or the faculty equity committee. In one case, it was a chairperson who had been removed, and there was a process for that, and he could have an advocate, and I was his advocate. And on the staff, to make a long story short, I was named staff advocate by a staff committee, the AOW Augsburg office workers, because I had helped a woman who had been fired. And I didn't get her job back, but at least the committee said that she had been mistreated. And I thought it was important to help her. And I helped her because nobody came forward to help her. I didn't even know her. But I knew that the procedures hadn't been followed, and I thought they should follow their procedures. And her boss was a friend of mine. But the only mistake she had made was that she hadn't given her a fair critical evaluation. She'd given her good evaluations always, but then she got mad one day and fired her. Yeah, that's what you can't do. And so she was trying to be nice, I think. And so then the HR person told her, well, I've kind of slipped off track into this story about the staff person, but so the staff person needed help, I thought. So I went and told her boss, who was my friend, that I was going to help her. She said, how did you get into this? And I said, well, nobody was helping her, and I felt that I had to, and she wasn't very happy. So I did help her, and the committee did say that she'd been mistreated. and they did give her some tuition remission for her children, so at least she got something. Well, then later she went to the Human Rights Commission and filed a suit against the boss. So then I felt, and she charged that the boss was using ageism as discrimination. It was because her husband was a doctor, and I don't know what, different thing. And I knew that she didn't really believe those things, and I didn't think they were true. So she had listed me as a witness. She hadn't talked to me, but she had listed me as a witness. So then I went to my friend and I said, well, now this, I've gotten these things from the, do whatever you think you should do. She didn't want to hear anything about it. So I wrote a letter to the Human Rights Commission and I argued against every criticism of that worker and defended the boss and said that the boss had made a mistake. And the reason I helped her was that the boss had not given her a fair evaluation and had not told her that she needed to improve in these areas, and had just gotten mad and fired her one day. And of course then she didn't believe it when the HR told her that she told the boss that she should give her a month to get better and so on. She didn't believe she was really going to get a free month, and I don't think anybody that was possible after that. So anyway, I defended the boss. So then one day I ran into Chuck in the hallway. We had a lot of these things in the hallway. He said, you should know that so-and-so was cleared of all those charges by the Human Rights Commission. And I said, oh, good. You should know I wrote a letter to the Human Rights Commission negating every one of those, or arguing against every one of the charges that the staff member made. So I'm glad. And so he was, so we're back to where I was with, he was wondering why we had these disagreements. So he said, I try to get as much for the college as I can, and you try to get as much for the individual. I said, I don't want anything for the individual except fair treatment. That's all I want. And I'd be happier if they didn't get anything except that fair treatment. I'm not after a year's salary, which I got for somebody else. I'm not after tuition remission. I'm after fair treatment. And I said, I think that I am also fighting for the college, because if we're unjust to one person, it hurts the whole college, which I really believe. So he was, probably another time he wrote me a letter when we were in the midst of a big disagreement, and he said, I want to know in writing if you respect your president. So I thought for a while, oh. So I wrote back, I show my respect for you by telling you what I really think. And I think that teachers, professors, administrators over other people below whose salaried jobs depend on them often don't get an honest response from those who are in charge of their grades or their salary or their promotion or whatever. And so I really believe that showed a lot, and that he was lucky to have somebody who was honest. And so we had these things back and forth. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just cut to the chase and say that underneath it all, I had a deep affection. Underneath all those real disagreements, I had a deep affection for Charles Anderson. And after he retired, before he retired, he had cancer. Did you know that he had cancer? And I had had cancer. So I met him in the hallway, and I said, I bet you didn't think I was going to be your role model. And so he did. I said, I survived cancer, and I want you to survive cancer. So in that sense, I should be your role model. So after he retired, he came up to me at Rick Nelson's retirement party. He took one of my hands in his, and he looked at me and he said, I miss our little exchanges. And I did too. But we probably were the only two people who missed them. But in the end, as I wrote to Kate, and I became friends when Chuck had Alzheimer's. My husband had Alzheimer's too, so I understood a lot of what she was going through. And I was really sorry when Charles Anderson came down with Alzheimer's, because I knew what it was. And outside of his family, I bet there was nobody sorrier than I was. But when he died, I sent a memorial to them, and I wrote in there that I thought a lot about our relationship, and I thought that in the end, we were really deep allies. We were working from different positions, different points of view, different perspectives, but we were both fighting for the college as we saw best to do. And one of the things that I regret not having told him, I told this to Phil yesterday too, I never thought I could do his job. He probably thought I did, but I never did. I was only fighting for those issues one at a time. You can see I have strong emotional feelings about him. He made me madder than anybody except my husband. And I think that's because I cared. I cared what he did. I guess I probably wanted him to be perfect. And he was an important person in my life. And I was happy to hear that when he had Alzheimer's, a former colleague of mine and the staff worked where he was. And she told me that she would tell him before she'd go out to eat there. Some of us from Augsburg would get together once a month. And she would tell him that she was going to see so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And every time she mentioned Mary Kingsley, he would laugh. And I was happy. I was happy. So, I don't know where we've ended up, but...
We can talk about why you decided to retire after the 42 years.
Oh, well, I was 67 for one thing. So I thought 67 was probably a good age. I also I'd had cancer in 1991, so I was 51. And in 2005, I had to have a pacemaker put in, so I had that health issue. But that worked fine. I'm on my second one now, and I'm doing fine. But I also had bad knees, and I needed surgery in both knees. But I don't think that any of that was really that much. I just think that I thought that I should retire when I was at my prime and still going strong, and I should make room for others. And so people would ask me, "Oh, are you going to travel a lot? You going to travel a lot?" And I said, like, unamuno, no, only inward. I'm only interested in traveling inward. And to two people, I said, and they said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to get ready to die." Well, that didn't go over well. What? Oh no, well, why should we shouldn't really be surprised. I've since found out that Leonardo da Vinci said, "I thought I was learning how to live, but really I was learning how to die." So he's pretty good company for this. But I have thought about that a lot. And so I am I've all my life probably tried to reconcile loving life and being ready to let go. So that's part of what I try to teach my students. And now I'm too close. Now I'm where I always felt close, because really, no matter how old we are, we're close. So life is short, and we have to use it to as best we can. So that's why I fought for what I thought was right. And I have to hope that I was. One time I lost a big battle. And one of my colleagues said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "I'm going to hope I was wrong." I did the best I could, and I'll hope I was wrong. And I think I probably was. So,
can you tell me what you miss the most from your time at Augsburg?
yes, I miss one thing the most. I miss the big battles. I enjoyed those battles. I enjoyed fighting for what I thought was right, and I enjoyed the excitement of the confrontation. So I think that one of Chuck's favorite adjectives for me was combative. Well, I think that combating something that's wrong, that you think is wrong, is good. I think it's good to be combative. But I was always combative with humor. There was always humor involved. But there was a strong drive for what the issue that whatever I was fighting for, I loved trying to figure out how to make the argument in the best way. So I miss that. And I liked helping somebody who needed help. I had one woman over here who had been fired one time. The only time I could help her was at 11 o'clock till midnight. And she said, "I feel so guilty having you do this." But I was sitting there trying to figure out how we could win our case. And she looked at me and she said, "You love this, don't you?" Yes. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. So I miss my students. And I enjoyed, especially toward the end, I enjoyed advising them as they were coming in to one of the most exciting times of their life, when they're just going to college, changing, growing, and going out at the beginning of their lives. That was a privilege to be part of that. So I miss that. But I'm happy now too. I can always be happy. And figure out a reason. I always try to have, well, if this works out this way, it'll be good for this reason. If it works out that, and Frankie said to me, "Oh, Pollyanna." I said, "Oh, no, not Pollyanna. I know what it means to have bad things happen. But you can also appreciate the good that can be found in the bad." So right now, I'm painting, as I said, painting the coal bin in the furnace room and painting the basement. So I'm fixing up my house, but at the same time, I've never realized so much that somebody else will be here someday. But in the meantime, I'm here and I'm enjoying it.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for being so open and honest.
You're welcome. I can't help it.